and I take full responsibility for what I did. And today, as a young man, I can begin to pay for that. I can never give back what I've taken.
It's cold-blooded murder. Cold-blooded murder, young man.
Meet 15 teenagers whose shocking actions have led to life sentences. From heart-wrenching betrayals to chilling crimes, their stories will leave you speechless and questioning everything you thought you knew. Let's start with these teens who will send shivers down your spine.
And two teenagers accused of killing their Spanish teacher have pled guilty to first-degree murder. The Fairfield High School Spanish teacher was beaten to death in a park with a baseball bat.
When you find the mutilated corpse of an old lady who had been declared missing, your first thoughts would probably never be that the act had been committed by an adolescent. But this was the case for 66-year-old Spanish teacher Barbara Graber. Graber had been brutally murdered by not one but two adolescents, her 16-year-old student Willard Miller and his friend Jeremy Goodale. The reason why is shocking, and the reaction of the perpetrators in court will send shivers down your spine. Willard Miller had been failing his Spanish class at Fairfield High School in Iowa, and his poor grades threatened his chances of going on a study trip overseas, so he frequently argued with his teacher, Barbara Graber, over it. Miller got fed up with not having his way and devised an evil plan to take her out. His plan was to ambush her along a path where she often walked, and he would employ the services of his friend Jeremy Goodale to act as a lookout. On the 2nd of November 2021, Miller finally got the chance to act on his plan when Graber was walking along the planned path. He and Goodale were able to blindside her before repeatedly striking her with a baseball bat until she passed away. Graber obviously couldn't survive the attack, so both boys dragged her corpse into a nearby park and hid it beneath a tarp before fleeing the scene in her van, which they abandoned at the end of a rural road. Both Miller and Goodale soon became the focus of the murder investigation after Goodale sent incriminating messages to another school friend on the social media app Snapchat. Goodale's friend quickly showed the evidence to the police, who sought search warrants for the homes and mobile devices of both perpetrators of the murder. It was reported that Miller had also given hints about the murder to multiple classmates, telling one that Graber might disappear before the murder, and telling another that he had caught someone with a baseball bat the day after the murder. Graber's body was discovered the following day, covered by a tarp and wheelbarrow following tip-offs, which the police had received, including from the classmates of Miller and Goodale. Both boys were eventually arrested and brought in for questioning. Goodale and Miller initially denied their involvements but eventually spilled the beans, although they both tried to make it seem that they had less involvement in the murder than the other. Ultimately, the evidence was stacked against them, and they were eventually charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a forcible felony. On the 18th of April 2023, both Goodale and Miller pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and were to be charged as adults due to the severity of the crime. Fortunately for both boys, Iowa does not permit juvenile crimes to be punished with a life sentence without the possibility of parole, but they knew they were going away for a long time. In July 2023, Miller was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 35 years before he's eligible for parole, which is 5 more years than was recommended by the prosecutors under a plea agreement. In November that year, Goodale, who had testified against Miller, received a recommended jail sentence of 25 years for his role in the murder. He and Miller were also ordered to pay $150,000 in restitution to Graber's family.
Got a nosebleed in court just as he's about to learn his fate. Jeremy Goodale pled guilty for his role in the crime that shocked America.
Numerous members of Graber's extended family showed up in court to express their pain and anger over the incident and the trauma it had caused the family ever since. They blamed Goodale for the murder as he chose not to prevent it, but some did offer words of encouragement. Goodale made a tearful apology to the family and friends of his victim, claiming that it was the worst decision of his life and that he wished he could go back in time to prevent it from ever happening.
2 years ago, I made the worst decision of my life, and I take full responsibility for what I did. And today, as a young man, I can begin to pay for that. I can never give back what I've taken.
He also apologized to the investigators for trying to mislead them during the interrogations, where he accused a gang of masked kids of perpetrating the murder and making him have to conceal the evidence. Miller, who is now 19, is currently in state custody at the Iowa Department of Corrections, while Goodale is being held at the Jefferson County Detention Center. The actions of both boys may have been horrific, but this next teenager committed an even more unspeakable crime.
What is the best place to stab someone? Is a small knife good for killing?
The case of Derek Rosa is a bizarre one, not just because of his age, but also the circumstances surrounding it and the manner in which he perpetrated the crime. Why a 13-year-old 8th grader would murder his own mother so gruesomely is up for debate, but his reaction in court was heartbreaking to say the least. On the night of Thursday the 12th of October 2023, 39-year-old Irina Garcia was asleep at her Hiley apartment complex at 211 West 79th Place, Florida, when she was suddenly attacked by her son, Derek, who stabbed her multiple dozen times with a small knife. Shortly after committing the murder, Rosa surprisingly called 911 to inform them of what he had done, and police officers arrived moments later to find the dead body of his mother in her bedroom next to the crib where her 14-day-old baby lay unharmed. Rosa, who had reportedly contemplated committing suicide, was swiftly arrested and taken into custody for questioning. Rosa's actions were shocking, to say the least. He had previously shown no real signs of mental illness and was said to be an honor roll student at school. When the news spread of his actions, no one could understand what could have been the motive behind it. Rosa also didn't stop at the brutal murder of his own mother. He went one step further and called an online friend to show them what he had done. He sent them 3 photos, including one where he was standing over his mother's corpse, and another of a pink-handed kitchen knife with blood on it, as well as a selfie of himself. Rosa was said to have also made several online searches to know how best to commit the stabbings. This was further evidence that the murder of his mom was premeditated. Following his arrest, Rosa was interrogated by detectives and confessed to killing his mother. 46 times he reportedly stabbed her, which meant he had continued to stab her even after she was probably dead. Video footage from the doorbell camera of the apartment also surfaced and showed events from a few hours before the murder was committed.
That moment right before and after he is accused of stabbing his mother to death.
At a pre-trial hearing in December 2023, Rosa, who had dozens of supporters in court including his maternal grandmother and his father, was questioned over his actions following his confession. Rosa was absent at his next court hearing on April 3, 2024, but he was represented by his family and tens of supporters who crowded the entrance to the court. Another hearing was set for May 2024. During his December 2023 court interrogation, Rosa became emotional as his confession to the investigators was being played in court.
The chilling interrogation video played in court. 13-year-old Derek Rosa allegedly confessing to brutally stabbing his mother, Irina Garcia, to death.
He put his head down as he appeared to begin crying, feeling devastated as the true extent of his actions dawned upon him. In reaction to the horrific confession, the judge ordered that he be held at an adult jail. Rosa pled not guilty to the charges, as he is set to be charged with first-degree murder as an adult and awaits trial for his verdict. Depending on how he is tried, he could face anywhere between 20 years and life imprisonment for his actions. Rosa, still only 14, is currently being held at the Metro West Detention Center, but his attorneys are reportedly pushing to have him moved back to a juvenile detention center, as they continue to push against the prosecutor's wishes to charge him as an adult. Investigations are still ongoing, so the fate of Rosa is left to be unknown. Up next, this teenager chose the worst possible way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
It's cold-blooded murder. Cold-blooded murder, young man.
It's not uncommon to see a teenager commit a robbery, but 17-year-old Michael Swanson would take it too far when he not only robbed 2 convenience stores, but ended up gruesomely murdering the attendants. His reaction to being sentenced for these crimes sent shockwaves down the spine of everyone in court. On Monday, the 15th of November, 2010, at the age of 17, Michael Swanson allegedly stole his mother's car and his grandfather's .40 caliber handgun and drove to northern Iowa in search of a thrill. Just after 9 p.m. that day, a young man wearing a ski mask walked into a Crossroads gas station in Algona, Iowa, where he demanded cash and cigarettes from the clerk, 47-year-old Vicky Bowman Hall. Despite complying with his request, the young man chose to shoot her anyway, leaving her for dead as he fled the scene in a Jeep Grand Cherokee. About an hour later, the same young man appeared at a come-and-go convenience store in Humboldt, about 30 miles south of Algona, where he once again demanded cash from the clerk, this time 61-year-old Sheila Myers. Despite Myers handing him the cash he'd asked for, he had already made up his mind just like the prior incident and shot her anyway, in the face, from only 2 feet away. She died instantly and he quickly fled the scene once again. That young man turned out to be 17-year-old Michael Swanson. Before committing those murders, Swanson had driven from St. Louis Park to northern Minnesota to Iowa, in a car he had stolen from his mother, Kathleen, along with her debit cards earlier that morning. This wasn't the first time he had stolen his mother's car. His mother, Kathleen, testifying that he'd had violent and sometimes criminal tendencies since he was a toddler. When he was only 11, she was told by a psychiatrist that he was a lost cause when she reported to them that he was a threat to their family members. Swanson had been clinically diagnosed with a host of mental disorders, including ADHD and bipolar disorder, amongst others. One time in 2006 for assembling and storing dangerous weapons, which his aunt discovered in a car trunk after she demanded the money he had stolen from her nonprofit organization where he was doing community service. These dangerous behaviors were a well-known ticking time bomb that would eventually lead Swanson to his downfall. During the second murder, police had received reports of the first from witnesses and began tracing the trail to Swanson. Swanson had managed to get to a McDonald's in Webster City, about 60 miles from Algona, before he was caught and arrested. The police officers also recovered the stolen money and cigarettes, as well as the handgun he used in perpetrating the murders. When interrogated over the murders, Swanson told the police that he shot them so they wouldn't be able to call police or identify him. During his prosecution, Swanson showed no remorse over his actions, as he confessed there was a deliberate attempt to murder Myers. Swanson was eventually charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of robbery. At his first hearing over the murder of Myers in June 2011, the jury reached a quick verdict and Swanson was found guilty of both charges, after which he flipped off the TV cameras. At his second trial that July, he was also found guilty of the robbery and murder of Bowman Hall. For his role in the murders of Myers and Bowman Hall, a then 18-year-old Swanson was handed 2 life sentences without the eligibility of parole. During his sentencing, Swanson could be seen smiling and laughing as his verdict was read.
Blooded murder, young man. And your counsel wants us to believe that you lack the capacity, that you were insane.
Jillian, the daughter of Bowman Hall, confronted Swanson in an emotional statement, calling him a weak coward.
My mom was not only completely 100% innocent, but she was also a defenseless woman when you came in with that gun.
Johnson reportedly told a psychiatrist that he had been fascinated by murder and committing acts of violence since he was 13, and intended to wait until he was 18 so he could kill his parents, who he had planned to be his first victims. In 2013, Swanson's sentence was revised to 60 years before parole eligibility by the governor of Iowa, Terry Branstad, who decided to commute the life sentences of 38 Iowa inmates who had been convicted as juveniles. In November 2014, Swanson was charged with attempted murder while in prison for attacking a fellow inmate with a knife. He was convicted of this charge in 2015 and sentenced to an additional 25 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2089 at the age of 96. It's safe to say he'll likely end up serving a life sentence. But our next story takes a dramatic turn. A young woman who fell deeply in love with a man is now spending her life behind bars.
They look like young sweethearts just goofing around until this chilling boast.
Day 3 after murdering somebody.
Whoa! Don't put that on the camera.
They admit to committing a murder.
Sierra was the youngest child born to Daniel and Elizabeth Halseth. In 2006, Sierra's mother, Elizabeth, became involved in local politics, and several years later, she won a seat in the Nevada State Senate. Eventually, Elizabeth and Daniel separated, and Sierra moved to Alaska with her mother. However, she returned to Nevada and formed a relationship with her father. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in June 2020, Sierra was in a difficult situation. The teenager refused to return to her mother and stepfather's home, claiming she feared her stepfather. Things quickly escalated, and Sierra defied a court order to run away to her father's house. Sierra's defiance escalated, and her relationship with her father, Daniel, became strained. Daniel, a loving parent, tried his best to support his daughter, but she refused to listen. Despite Daniel's efforts to maintain a positive relationship, Sierra's behavior grew more rebellious and defiant. As time went on, Sierra's behavior took a darker turn. She began associating with an 18-year-old man named Aaron Guerrero. Despite his age, Sierra fell deeply in love with the young man. However, her father, aware of the potential dangers of such an age gap, banned her from having contact with Aaron. With their love for one another burning strong, Sierra and Aaron devised a plan to be together. They decided they could only be together by eliminating Daniel from their lives. On April 8, 2021, they shopped for gloves, bleach, and saws, effectively creating a murder kit. The following morning, when Daniel's mother was unable to contact him, she sent a friend to perform a welfare check on him. Little did she know that this check would uncover the devastating truth. When the friend arrived at Daniel's home, they found the front door unlocked, and upon entering discovered Daniel's lifeless body. An autopsy would later determine that Daniel had been stabbed over 70 times. When crime scene investigators arrived at the scene, they discovered knives in the kitchen sink and a chainsaw on the living room floor. 4 days after the murder, Sierra and her boyfriend Aaron were tracked down and apprehended in Utah. Upon examining their phones, investigators discovered a video of the two laughing about killing Sierra's father. This chilling footage served as damning evidence against them, confirming their guilt in the minds of investigators. Sierra and Aaron were both arrested and charged with Daniel's murder. During their interrogation, Aaron admitted that he and Sierra had plotted to carry out the murder because Sierra said her father was abusive. However, Daniel's loved ones adamantly denied claims that Daniel had ever mistreated his daughter. In May 2022, Sierra and Aaron pleaded guilty to murder and a slew of other charges related to the murder. During the sentencing hearing, Aaron apologized for his actions, expressing regret for the pain and loss he had caused. However, Sierra remained silent, choosing not to address the heinous crime she had committed. The judge sentenced Sierra and Aaron to 22 years to life in prison. Sierra is serving her sentence at the Florence McClure Women's Correctional Facility in Nevada. If you thought that one murdering teenage girl was madness, prepare yourself for the chilling tale of identical twins who joined forces to unleash double the trouble on their unsuspecting mother.
Twins share everything: birthdays, clothing, even DNA. But Jasmia and Tasmia Whitehead also share a dark past.
Jasmia and Tasmia Whitehead are identical twins to Jarmeka Yvonne Nikki Whitehead. Due to their mother's absence, these twins were raised by their great-grandmother. Despite the lack of parental guidance, Jasmia and Tasmia were academically successful, being honor roll students and Girl Scouts. However, their harmonious upbringing was disrupted when their mother sought custody in 2007. The relationship between Nikki and her twin daughters turned sour as conflicts arose over Nikki's attempts to assert control in their lives. The twins, feeling resentment towards their mother, expressed their dissatisfaction through physical confrontations. As a result, they found themselves seeking counseling together as a family. Eventually, the court intervened, granting custody of the twins back to their great-grandmother. However, this temporary arrangement only lasted a few weeks, as the court decided to hand custody back to Nikki on a 2-week trial basis. On January 13, 2010, several days after Jasmia and Tasmia returned to Nikki's care, the girls called 911 and reported they found their mother dead. Nikki had been beaten with a vase and stabbed several times. Initially, the police treated Jasmia and Tasmia as victims. The medical examiner called Nikki's murder a crime of passion due to how brutal it was and felt whoever killed her was not a stranger. After Nikki's murder, the detectives investigated her boyfriend as a suspect. However, he was ultimately cleared through DNA testing. It wasn't long into the investigation of Nikki's murder that Jasmia and Tasmia's lie unraveled. Bite marks and other injuries on the girls' bodies implicated them in their mother's murder. The twins began to tell the truth and said their mother, Nikki, threatened them with a pot on the stove, and a fight ensued. Jasmia admitted to breaking a vase over her mother's head, while Tasmia said she used the pot to attack her mother. They explained that their mother, who had a knife, started to stab them. As the assault on Nikki continued, her twin daughters overpowered her and dragged her to the bathtub, where she ultimately died. On May 21, 2010, Jasmia and Tasmia were charged with murder. Everyone was shocked that such innocent-looking twin teenage girls could commit a crime as horrific as what happened, especially to their mother. The type of murder that the twins committed is called matricide. Matricide refers to the act of murdering one's mother. It is a particularly heinous crime. In 2014, Tasmia pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, making false statements and possession of a knife during a crime. The judge sentenced Tasmia to 30 years in prison and is currently serving her sentence in Arundel State Prison. 1 month later, Jasmia pleaded guilty to the same charges as her twin sister, and she is also serving her 30-year sentence in Pulaski State Prison. Teenage girls are often confronted with the weight of their future, but occasionally make one poor choice with devastating consequences. This next case exemplifies how such a misstep can swiftly unravel a promising destiny.
Just a year and a half ago, this high school band called Undecided was rocking the summer festival in Ann Arbor. Everything was looking up for them and lead singer Sam Grigg.
Samantha Griggs was an 18-year-old senior at Saline High School in Michigan when she found herself involved in a tragic incident that resulted in the murder of a 19-year-old man. The fateful night began in February 2014 when Samantha, accompanied by two of her friends, Brendan Heim and Tyrell Braderners, drove to East Lansing, Michigan to meet Dustin Froka for a drug deal. However, their true intentions were to rob Dustin. Driven to gain quick money, Samantha agreed to serve as a getaway driver. As the trio approached East Lansing, they encountered Dustin, who willingly entered Samantha's Ford Explorer. Dustin was a student at Michigan State University. He studied marketing, was an up-and-coming rapper, and was the father of a 10-month-old daughter. However, at the time, Dustin was struggling with substance abuse. People who knew Dustin spoke to reporters with the Lansing State Journal and said that despite signing to a record label, he had been on a downward spiral since the fall. Unbeknownst to Dustin, his fate was already sealed when he entered Samantha Griggs' Ford Explorer. During the drive, the two teenage boys in the back seat with Dustin started to beat him, causing multiple skull fractures with brass knuckles. The violence escalated quickly, fueled by anger and greed. To escape, Dustin jumped out of the car, traveling up to 45 to 60 miles per hour. Unfortunately, his desperate attempt to escape ended in tragedy. After the incident, Dustin's lifeless body was discovered along the interstate. The Michigan State Police were called in to investigate, and a search quickly led to the discovery of Samantha, Brendan, and Tyrell, who were arrested and charged with Dustin's murder. Instead of heading off to Eastern Michigan University as she was supposed to after graduation from high school, Samantha was sentenced to between 6 and 15 years in prison after pleading guilty to manslaughter and unarmed robbery charges. During the sentencing hearing, Samantha expressed remorse and apologized for her actions. She tearfully claimed that she had never intended for harm to come to Dustin and that she believed he would only experience a robbery. However, Dustin's stepsister denied these claims, stating that Samantha lacked morals and consciousness. Dustin's stepmother agreed, emphasizing that Samantha had several opportunities to prevent Dustin's murder from happening, but never did. As these statements were made, Samantha nodded in agreement, wiping away tears as she stared at the defense table. Before being convicted of Dustin's murder, Samantha had a clean criminal record, and she was a promising musician with a promising future laid out before her. However, her actions had tragically altered the course of her life forever. As Samantha serves time behind bars instead of going to East Lansing University, our next teen was behind the most deadliest school shootings of all time.
Are you a citizen of the United States?
Yes, sir.
Are you requesting consideration for a court-appointed attorney?
Yes, sir.
Are you out on bond for any other charge?
No, sir.
The depraved actions of 17-year-old Demetrius Pogortzis over a 25-minute period at the Santa Fe High School in Santa Fe, Texas, on the 18th of May 2018, which left 10 people dead, would shock the entire United States, and his reaction when faced with the court would baffle observers. The story of Demetrius Pogortzis' actions began on the 2nd of March 2018, 2 months before it actually happened. On that day, Pogortzis, born on the 12th of October 2000, logged on to an arms purchasing website and purchased 50 rounds of .38 special ammunition, as well as 105 rounds of 12-gauge shotgun ammunition. 2 weeks later, on March 13, 2018, Pogortzis ordered an additional round of shotgun ammunition and paid using an American Express gift card, using his real name and address for shipment but not specifying his age. Pogortzis was on the honor roll at his school and played on the school football team. However, he was regarded as quiet and was reportedly often bullied by fellow students and even coaches of the football team. This suggests that he may have been plotting his revenge with the purchase of those guns. Pogortzis would finally get his chance to strike in the early morning of May 18, 2018, when he suddenly began firing his weapon into an art class of unexpecting students at the school's art complex. As he began shooting, a staff member pulled a fire alarm which caused most of the school to evacuate, but those in the art classroom weren't so lucky. Pogortzis went on a manic spree, walking into one of the classrooms and shooting at a victim while singing a popular Queen song, Another One Bites the Dust, in between shots, then proceeding to shoot through the storage closet, where most of the art students had run to hide themselves in with a shotgun. Pogortzis then briefly left the art room, which caused students to leave the closet and attempt to barricade the art room door. However, he returned and pushed the door open, and upon spotting a student he knew, he exclaimed, "Surprise!" and shot the student in the chest. Pogortzas' shooting spree would continue for 25 minutes until Santa Fe ISD police officers arrived at the scene to confront him. Rather than surrender, he exchanged fire with the police officers and critically wounded one of them. Pogortzas continued to fire rounds randomly and even threatened to shoot more officers, which forced them to retaliate, injuring him in the process. He would eventually be arrested following his surrender due to the injury, and was detained as the police evacuated other students and staff from the art complex. At the end of his shooting exercise, Pogortzas had claimed the lives of 10 people, including 8 students and 2 teachers, as well as injuring a further 13 individuals. This makes the shooting the 8th deadliest school shooting in United States history. Following Pogortzas' arrest, various types of explosive devices and a Molotov cocktail were found in and around the school. During the investigations, a note from Pogortzas' journal suggests that not only did he want to commit the shooting, but he also wanted to commit suicide after the shooting, and had even planned on committing the act for some time. Pogortzas was handed 11 federal charges for the capital murder of 10 people and the aggravated assault against a public servant, and was held in custody without bail. If convicted, he faced a maximum sentence of 40 years to life, but due to his age, he was ineligible for the death penalty or a life sentence without parole. In June 2019, it was announced that the state trial for Pogortzas would take place in Richmond in January 2020. However, 4 months later, on the 4th of November 2019, he was found by 3 experts to be unfit to stand trial. On the 11th of February 2022, following a long mental health treatment while in custody at North Texas State Hospital, Pogortzas was again found incompetent to stand trial and was ordered to stay in the mental hospital for another 12 months. Pogortzas made an appearance in court in February 2019, where his attorney made a request for a change of venue, due to the publicity which the case had received. During the hearing, Pogortzas showed no emotions and stayed silent through the trial.
Demetrius Pogortzas turned 19 while awaiting his first in-person court appearance since last May's massacre inside Santa Fe High School.
His apparent lack of remorse was called out by a mother of one of the victims.
To see if I could see some remorse, and I didn't get it.
In a published statement, Pogortzas' family extended their condolences to the victims and thanked first responders for their assistance, while also admitting they were as shocked by the event as everyone else. The parents of 2 of the victims filed lawsuits against Pogortzas' parents with claims that his father didn't properly secure the murder weapons, which were revealed to belong to him, and that the parents were negligent in entrusting their son with the firearms. The trial is set for July 2024. Pogortzas, now 23, is currently in solitary confinement and is receiving treatment as he awaits the declaration of yet another court date to find out how long he's going to be incarcerated for. But Pogortzas isn't alone in this dark chapter of youth violence. Enter Gabe Parker.
16-year-old Gabriel Parker is accused of shooting and killing 2 of his classmates and injuring 14 others in the shooting back in January.
In the morning of January 23, 2018, as students of the Marshall County High School in Kentucky got ready for the start of classes, 15-year-old student Gabe Parker opened fire in an open area at the school, murdering 2 students and injuring 14 others. After he was caught, he was made to face the consequences of his actions, and his behavior in the court shocked everyone. Gabriel Ross Parker was born on the 3rd of March 2002 and grew up in a broken home, which culminated in his mother getting remarried to his stepfather. Despite this, he showed no true signs at home of being capable of violence, but sometimes the propensity to commit murder stays well hidden until the act is perpetrated. On the 23rd of January 2018, students of Parker's high school were gathering in the commons prior to the start of class, blissfully unaware of what was about to befall them. The then 15-year-old sophomore, Parker had gone to school that day with a Ruger handgun and an intent to commit murder. Parker had reportedly gone to the school's band room earlier to check with his friends before the shooting, to make sure they were not in the area before returning to begin his attack. Just before 8 a.m., Parker brought out his handgun in the commons area and emotionlessly opened fire at the unsuspecting students. In the process of fleeing, multiple students were struck by bullets while others were trampled on in the ensuing stampede. 2 of the students, Bailey Nicole Holt and Preston Ryan Cope, who were both 15 years old, succumbed to their gunshot wounds, while 18 others, including 5 girls and 13 boys. After the shooting, Parker discarded his weapon and ran to the weight room to hide with other students, who had been unaware he was the shooter and motioned for him to join them in hiding. However, one of the students who was hiding in the location recognized him as the shooter and alerted a teacher in the room about his identity. The teacher then called law enforcement. The Marshall County Sheriff from the Marshall County Sheriff's Department arrived a few minutes later and located Parker and arrested him shortly after. Following his arrest, Parker's bag was searched by police, and inside was a copy of the Communist Manifesto and a large Winchester sheath knife. Meanwhile, he had been brought in for interrogation to get to the root of his actions. During the interrogation, Parker expressed that he was an atheist and revealed his disillusioned views of life. Parker also indicated the shooting was an experiment to see how students and society would respond. Parker was eventually arraigned in Marshall County Circuit Court on the 16th of February, 2018 on charges of 2 counts of murder and 4 counts of first-degree assault, and he was to be tried as an adult due to the gravity of his crimes. Due to his age, Parker was ineligible for either the death penalty or life without parole, and according to Kentucky law, he also had to be eligible for parole after serving 25 years. He would plead guilty to the charges at a hearing on the 28th of April, 2020 in exchange for a plea bargain. As part of the plea offer, 6 of the assault charges were amended to assault in the second degree, Class C felonies. On the 12th of June 2020, an 18-year-old Gabe Parker was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 70 years, with the eligibility for parole after serving 20 years. After his sentence was read out, Parker showed no emotion and merely nodded to the announcement and let his attorney speak for him.
18-year-old inmate pled guilty to all 16 charges, including 2 counts of murder for the deaths of Bailey Holt and Preston Cope.
Some victims of the shooting recounted the horrific incident and the trauma it had caused them, while the parents of the victims were expectedly infuriated while recollecting their experience and agreed that Parker deserved the life sentence, even if some did admit that they were open to forgiving him in the future.
You're a sorry, low-life demon, piece of garbage, and I can't stand the sight of you, and you will never see the light of day again, and for that I'm grateful.
A civil lawsuit was filed against Parker's parents in 2019 by the parents of 4 of the victims of the shooting, including the 2 who sadly lost their lives. They were reportedly asked to be awarded $36.7 million in compensation, although that wouldn't be enough to bring back their kids. Parker, who is now 22 years old, is currently imprisoned at the North Point Training Center in Danville, Kentucky, and will be eligible for parole in June 2040 at the age of 38. Just when you think the horror ends there, enter Ethan Crumbly and his parents.
I am a really bad person. I have done terrible things that no one should ever do. I have lied, been not trustworthy. I've hurt many people, and that's what I've done.
On the 30th of November 2021, a 15-year-old Ethan Crumbly turned up at his high school in Oxford Township, Michigan, armed with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun and a strong will to kill. Around lunchtime, he would finally get his wish as he appeared from the school bathroom, then began to shoot at anyone he could see. The teenager would end up murdering 4 students and injuring 7 people more. Ethan Crumbly was born in Atlantic Beach, Florida on the 28th of April 2006 to parents Jennifer and James, both of whom had prior minor criminal records from 1995 to 2005 for DUI and check fraud. He reportedly had a troubled childhood, with his parents often abandoning him at home, which led to him being introverted, having few friends, and often exhibiting weird behaviors. Crumbly also reportedly videotaped himself torturing animals, once allegedly keeping a baby bird's head in a jar and placing it in the school bathroom. He also frequently talked about battling with demons. Despite his obvious troubles, his parents allegedly never sought therapy for him, and those problems would ultimately lead to the events of 30th November 2021. On that fateful day, Ethan Crumbly went to his Oxford High School with the intent to shoot it up. He had already hidden his semi-automatic gun away in the school the day prior, a gun his father had bought him just the previous Friday. Some school officials had raised suspicions of Ethan to his parents that very day due to his actions, which included searching for ammunition online and making sketches of himself committing a school shooting. However, this was not properly handled, and they would realize in the worst possible way. At around 12:51 p.m. on November 30th, 2021, Crumbly was spotted coming out of the school bathroom with his gun, which he had probably hidden in there. Immediately afterwards, he started firing sporadically in the hallway with hundreds of students passing through. When they began to flee, he slowly walked down the hallway and began shooting into classrooms and at anyone who was unable to escape before moving on to the next classroom. An intercom voiceover alerted students and teachers to an active shooter, and the teachers began locking and barricading doors and also covering windows. Due to the quick response by students and staff of the school, Crumbly was unable to actually enter any of the classrooms. Nevertheless, some students and staff weren't so lucky, as Crumbly had already claimed some victims. 3 students, 17-year-old Madison Baldwin, 16-year-old Tate Meyer, and 14-year-old Hannah St. Juliana were killed at the scene, and 8 other people, including a teacher, were injured. One of the injured students, 17-year-old Justin Schilling, would succumb to his injuries in hospital the following day. Law enforcement arrived at the scene only 3 minutes after the attack started, following a 911 call, and promptly arrested Crumbly, who still had 7 rounds of ammunition loaded into his gun and 2 15-round magazines, and took him in for questioning as investigations commenced. Crumbly's cell phone was revealed to contain 2 videos, both filmed the night before the incident, where he talked about his plans to shoot and kill students at the school the following day. He also had a journal where he reportedly detailed his desire to shoot up the school in a bid to get U.S. President Biden impeached. Crumbly's parents had been at the school earlier that day following the reports of their son's behavior, and decided against taking him home despite being fully aware that he was in the possession of an unlocked gun. Following the investigations, Ethan was charged as an adult with terrorism resulting in death, 4 counts of first-degree murder, 7 counts of assault with intent to murder, as well as 12 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. He would plead guilty to these charges at a hearing in October 2022. On the 3rd of December 2021, a prosecutor announced that both of Crumbly's parents were being charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter for their failure to secure the gun he used during the shootings. On getting this information, his parents would bizarrely decide to flee the town and miss their first arraignment date before they were eventually caught, arrested, and charged the following day. On the 9th of December 2023, Crumbly was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in what was a tense courtroom. Right before the sentencing, a remorseful Crumbly apologized to the courtroom and stated that he would accept whatever punishment was handed to him and aimed to do better. He even attempted to forgive his parents for their role in the murder.
Whatever sentence it is, I do plan to be better than I am. I don't know if you'll believe that, but records of 15, 20, 25 years can show that I will change.
The trial for Crumbly's parents was completed by the 14th of March 2024, with his dad and mom being sentenced to 10 years and 15 years in prison, respectively. During the sentencing hearing, parents of the victims vehemently blamed Crumbly's parents for neglecting their responsibilities, which was what ultimately led to the deaths of their children. Crumbly's actions led to a series of copycat school shooting threats, which resulted in over 500 schools in Michigan and 6 other states being closed. Today, he is held at the Oaks Correctional Facility in Manistee, Michigan, as he has turned 18. His mother, Jennifer, is currently imprisoned in the Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility, and his father, James, is in the Bellamy Creek Correctional Facility. After that family affair of evil, take a seat as Dexter Johnson and his 5 friends end a precious life.
Dexter Darnell Johnson, the jury has found you guilty of capital murder. In accordance with the laws of the state of Texas, this court hereby assesses your punishment of death. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is going to complete your jury service. I'm going to meet you in the jury room.
In the early hours of Sunday, June 18, 2006, in Harris County, Texas, 5 young adults were riding in a black Nissan Sentra looking for someone to rob. They were Ashley Irvin, her brother, Lewis Irvin, Keith Ron Fields, Timothy Randall, and newly turned 18-year-old Dexter Darnell Johnson. After minutes of scanning the area, they came across a parked blue Toyota Matrix, which had 2 people sitting inside, 23-year-old Maria Aparici and her 17-year-old boyfriend, Hui No. Johnson swiftly left the vehicle and approached the blue Toyota while holding a shotgun. On getting there, he stood outside the driver's door and threatened to shoot the passengers if they didn't cooperate. Little did they know that their fate had already been sealed. Following the threats by Dexter Johnson, Maria Aparici and Hui No decided to comply and made their way to the back seat of the Toyota, where they were joined by Lewis Irvin, while Fields climbed into the passenger seat, which had been vacated. Johnson then started the Toyota and began driving around the block as he asked for money, while Ashley and Randall followed behind in their vehicle. Eventually, both vehicles stopped near a wooded area. Then Fields forced No out of the Toyota and held a gun to his head while Johnson r***ed up Parisi right there in the car. After Johnson finished, he and Fields marched the couple into the woods and shot each of them in the head before driving back to their apartment, as Randall and the Irvins followed behind. They even used Aparici's credit card to purchase gas for both vehicles on their way back. 2 days later, on the 20th of June 2006, Field's mom, Felicia Williams, called the Humble Police Department to inform them about 3 suspicious vehicles which were parked in the parking lot of her apartment complex. Officers responded to the call and discovered that all 3 vehicles had been reported as stolen, including a blue Toyota Matrix. The next day, the mother of the 14-year-old girl also called the attention of the police department after she failed to return home past her curfew. When the officers arrived, the girl had returned, and on further questioning they found out that she had been with Johnson earlier that day. The police officers headed to Williams' apartment and found Johnson smoking and in possession of some marijuana. They also found a shotgun under one of the beds, which Johnson admitted to owning. As a result, Johnson was arrested for possession of marijuana, and his shotgun was also confiscated. Around this time, Aparici's father had already reported her disappearance to various police departments. When Everett Hargrave, a detective in charge of the investigation, became aware of the blue matrix recovered in Humble, the dots began to connect. Ngo's family had also reported his disappearance, and Aparici's father reported the use of her credit cards, so the detective went on a search for more clues and was able to access footage which showed 2 black males using the credit card at a Walmart in Humble. Johnson, who was still in custody, was called in for questioning and initially denied the allegations. However, Hargrave didn't buy the lies and instructed the Harris County District Attorney's Office to charge him with aggravated robbery. Johnson was also transferred to the Harris County Jail on the same day. On the 23rd of June, Randall was also arrested and interrogated, and he eventually ended up showing the officers where the bodies of Aparici and Ngo were. Around that time, the Irvins were also arrested and questioned. That evening, Johnson was transferred to the Houston Police Department's Homicide Division, where he was questioned and admitted to Aparici, but denied shooting the couple with his shotgun. By the time Johnson and all 4 of his accomplices had been interrogated, it was alleged that the deaths of Aparici and Ngo were part of a 25-day crime spree perpetrated by the crew, which resulted in 5 deaths. For his alleged role in the murders, Johnson was charged with 2 counts of manslaughter and sentenced to death in 2007. Johnson looked pretty disappointed on hearing the sentence as he fell deeply into his seat in confusion.
Your punishment of death. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is going to complete your jury service. I'm going to meet you in the jury room.
Following over a decade on death row, his execution was initially set for the 2nd of May 2019, but it was postponed 90 days to the 15th of August due to issues with his lawyers. However, a day before the new execution date, the Court of Appeal decided to stay the execution with a ruling that permitted Johnson to litigate his claim that he was ineligible for the death penalty due to an intellectual disability, as he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Today, Johnson, who is now 36, remains in custody and awaits a final verdict on his case. But this next teenager wasn't so lucky.
Shane Bargo Jr. should be sentenced to death, yes.
Michael Bargo holds his head after hearing he is sentenced to death for the 2nd time on Tuesday.
On the night of April 17, 2011, 18-year-old Michael Shane Bargo and 4 of his friends, Amber Wright, Kyle Hooper, Charlie Ellie, and Justin Soto, schemed in the gruesome murder of 15-year-old Seth Jackson. The motive? A toxic mix of youthful recklessness, jealousy, and spite. Seth Jackson had dated Amber Wright for just over 3 months before the couple had a bitter breakup in March 2011. After the breakup, Wright became romantically involved with Michael Bargo, but continued to send text messages to Jackson. This obviously made Bargo jealous when he found out. For weeks leading up to his murder, Jackson was repeatedly threatened by Bargo, including cases at Wright's home and one at his own home, with his mother reportedly once hearing Bargo tell her son that he had a bullet with his name on it. During that same period, Ellie, who lived in a 2-bedroom home in Summerfield, Florida, had allowed some of her friends, including Bargo and Hooper, to move in with her. On the day of the murder, Bargo assembled his roommates, first informing Hooper, who had apparently lost a love interest to Jackson, that he wanted to make a plan to murder Jackson. Later that afternoon, Bargo got Wright to use text messages to lure Jackson over to Ellie's home, with the plan being to ambush him once he got into the apartment. Jackson was initially skeptical about Wright's texts, but decided to go visit anyway, despite the warnings of his close friend, William Samalot. After arriving at Ellie's home, Jackson sat down waiting to speak with Wright before Hooper, who was in one of the rooms, grabbed a wooden object, then ran into the living room, where he delivered a blow to the blindsided Jackson. Bargo, who followed closely behind, then shot at Jackson, who managed to survive the initial rain of bullets, and ran out the door. However, Jackson didn't make it very far before he was tackled by Soto and shot at by Bargo once again. The two boys then beat him up further before his almost lifeless body was carried back into the apartment and put in a bathtub. Bargo's plan was to make sure that the last face Jackson would ever see before his death would be his, and he made sure of this by delivering the final shot to Jackson's face. Bargo and Soto disposed of Jackson's lifeless body, putting it into a sleeping bag and burning it in Ellie's fire pit. The following morning, Wright's stepdad, James Havens, arrived at Ellie's home to help dispose of Jackson's remains, which he dumped at a remote water-filled rock quarry. The following day, police arrived in the neighborhood to investigate the reported disappearance of Jackson. Bargo had to stay away, and Havens tried to help by sending him to stay with the family of his girlfriend, Kristen Williams. However, despite not knowing the Williams, Bargo told basically everyone that cared to listen what he had done, with subtle twists to the story. On the 19th of April 2011, law enforcement finally arrived at the Williams home and took Bargo into custody. Even after his arrest, Bargo continued to tell on himself, informing a fellow inmate of what he had done. After the police obtained multiple search warrants, his revolver was also found in Ellie's home, with the box found in his grandmother's home. The fire pit in Ellie's home was also discovered to contain possible human remains. Jackson's remains were eventually found underwater beneath the Ocala quarry, and his DNA was strongly matched to that of the missing person they were looking for. Despite all of his prior comments linking himself to the murder, Bargo initially denied his involvement when interrogated in court, claiming that he had only participated in disposing of Jackson's body and suggesting that Hooper may have done the deed and implicating the rest of his friend group. Despite his attempts to retell the story during his trial, Bargo was eventually charged with first-degree murder with a firearm and was found guilty in August 2013 by a jury who overwhelmingly recommended that he be sentenced to death, despite family and friends testifying in his favor.
The defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree with a firearm, as charged in the indictment. So say we all, dated this 20th day of August 2015.
Bargo's attorneys appealed the verdict, claiming that there was insufficient evidence and that Bargo had been deprived of a fair trial amongst other arguments in his case. The Florida Supreme Court eventually ordered a new sentencing hearing because the jury recommendation wasn't unanimous, being a 10-2 verdict. However, it eventually became unanimous in the resentencing on September 12, 2019, and Bargo was set to face the death penalty.
Should be sentenced to death, yes.
Michael Bargo holds his head after hearing he is sentenced to death for the second time on Tuesday.
Now 31, Bargo is currently spending his last days at the Union Correctional Institution. While Bargo is on death row for murdering a supposed foe, this next teenager suffered the same fate for literally backstabbing his own friend.
The sentence of death shall be imposed upon Austin Gregory Myers on the charge of aggravated murder.
Myers once again showed no emotion.
On the 28th of January 2014, Justin Back, an 18-year-old, was murdered in Waynesville, Warren County, Ohio, by two young men who had broken into his family home to steal a safe from the house. Those two men were Timothy Mosley and 19-year-old Austin Myers, whose evil plans ruined not just the life of an innocent boy and his family, but also theirs. Back was childhood friends with Myers when they were in middle school, as they both attended the same high school. He only graduated high school in 2013 and had plans to join the U.S. Navy. However, his dream would be cut short by a man he used to call his friend. On the day before Back's murder, Myers suggested a plan to make a quick buck to Mosley. The plan was to commit a robbery, and there were two potential targets, a substance dealer or Back's stepfather, Mark Cates. Myers was aware from his friendship with Back that Cates had a safe in his family home where he potentially kept thousands of dollars and a gun. Mosley agreed to Myers' plan to rob Cates, and both young men drove to Back's home with intentions to break into the safe. However, on getting there, they realized that Back was home, so they made a new plan, this time to murder Back, cart away with the safe, and make it seem like Back had stolen the safe and run away from home. Myers bought a 3-foot-length steel cable and fastened it into a choke wire. The next morning, Myers and Mosley purchased various chemicals and rubber gloves in anticipation of having to dispose of a body. The pair drove to Back's home that afternoon with the intention of catching him off guard with the choke wire. Oblivious to their plans, Back let them into the house, and all three men had a short discussion before they finally had their moment to strike. Mosley saw a chance to attack Back from behind with the choke wire. However, Back fought back, and in the resulting scuffle involving all three men, Mosley had to stab Back from behind before Myers continued choking him. Mosley continued to stab Back around the chest area until he was finally dead. Myers and Mosley cleaned up the kitchen where they killed Back before wrapping his body in a blanket and throwing it into the trunk of Mosley's car. The young men eventually decided to hide the body in a field and poured on some of the chemicals to speed up decomposition of the body. Myers and Mosley headed back to Back's place for one last attempt at the safe, but once they opened it, they found out there was only loose change and some random items inside. Cates came home to find his home trashed and quickly contacted the police. He also couldn't find Back despite finding his phone in the house, so he knew something was wrong. This was confirmed when the police described sighting a car which Myers had used to visit Back the previous day. Myers was eventually found, detained and questioned, but he denied having anything to do with Back's disappearance or the burglary. Mosley was also questioned and initially denied the allegations. However, at a second round of interrogations, Myers tried to implicate Mosley, who, upon hearing the false confession, decided to tell the truth. Back's body was eventually found, and it was determined that he had died of the multiple stab wounds, and both Myers and Mosley were accused of having a direct role in his murder. Myers was charged with 1 count of aggravated murder, 1 count of kidnapping, 1 count each of aggravated robbery and burglary, 1 count of theft, 1 count of tampering with evidence, 1 count of safecracking, and 1 count of abuse of a corpse.
That the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the aggravating circumstance outweighs the mitigating factor. Therefore, the sentence of death shall be imposed upon Austin Gregory Myers on the charge of aggravated murder.
Following his sentencing hearing, Myers showed no emotion but admitted to his horrible mistake and asked for his life to be spared. He also told the jury that killing him won't fix anything and that he wouldn't feel anything. Myers' sentencing caused some media uproar, as his accomplice, Mosley, received a life sentence without parole due to a plea bargain despite being the one who pulled out a knife and made the first stab. Myers, who is now 29, is currently imprisoned at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution, while Mosley is housed at the Ross Correctional Institution. Now, let's explore the chilling case of Joshua Phillips, a story that still shocks and saddens to this day.
Tonight, the sister of this 8-year-old girl killed by her then teenage neighbor in one of Jacksonville's biggest murder cases. Well, her sister says she is sick, thinking that her sister's killer could possibly walk free one day.
Murder is not a crime that one would expect from a child, gruesome murder especially, and that is why to this day it is both shocking and sad to hear the story of Joshua Phillips. It was a day like any other in Duval County until it wasn't. An 8-year-old girl, Maddie Clifton, was mistakenly hit by a baseball and would not stop crying. Her cries scared 14-year-old neighbor Joshua Phillips, with whom she had been playing, and in fear that her crying would attract the attention of people around and get him in trouble with his father, who was reportedly mistreating him and would punish him for having friends in the house, the young teenager did the unimaginable. What Joshua Phillips did to avoid getting into trouble with his father will go down in history as one of the most brutal crimes committed in Jacksonville, Florida. In November 1998, the entire neighborhood and the police set out to search for its young member. Everyone, including Joshua Phillips' mother, began handing out flyers of the missing child to people, asking if they'd seen her. While the search party was still out there looking for the little girl, Joshua Phillips' mother made a shocking, gory discovery. Under her teenage son's waterbed was the lifeless body of the missing Maddie Clifton. It turns out that Joshua Phillips had, in a bid to stop Maddie from crying, dragged her into the house he lived in with his parents, hit her repeatedly with a baseball bat until he thought she was dead. When he finished, he then hid her body under his waterbed. His dad returned from work and Joshua was terrified to discover that Maddie was still breathing and moaning. He then stabbed her multiple times until she died. It wasn't until a week after Joshua had killed Maddie that Joshua's mother found the missing body and alerted the authorities. The murder of that little girl was traumatizing for everyone involved. Both the families of the girl who was murdered and the teenager who had committed the crime were distraught. The court initially sentenced Phillips to life imprisonment without parole. But in 2005, the Supreme Court ruled that it is unconstitutional to sentence a child to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. State laws required that another hearing be conducted after 25 years to reassess the situation and see whether or not a person who was convicted as a child is fit to rejoin society. This is required for all juvenile convictions involving death.
It eroded our marriage, replaced love with grief, deep sadness, and a pain that no family should ever have to bear.
At the resentencing, the family of the deceased, her mother, father, and sister all came to testify against Phillips.
Why should the defendant be allowed to live normally while Maddie lies in cold in a grave?
The state of Phillips' mind is not certain as he watches the court proceeding, blinking repeatedly, his face expressionless. The late Maddie's mother then goes on to say that if her daughter's murderer was ever released from jail, she hoped she'd no longer be on earth. Reports held that Phillips has been of good behavior in prison, has won multiple awards, and became a Buddhist monk. He also hopes to live in a monastery for the rest of his life if he gets out of jail. Reports also confirmed that Phillips is indeed sorry for his actions. The family of the deceased did not appear to care about that as they insisted that their daughter and sister's murderer should not be allowed to live freely, stating that Joshua hadn't just deprived their daughter of her right to live and them of the joy of watching her grow, but also that her death had put a strain on their marriage. Despite the evidence of good behavior on Josh's part, the judge upheld the original sentence of the court. Joshua will remain in jail for the rest of his life. One might find the conviction of Joshua Phillips to be harsh since he committed these crimes as a young teenager, but wait until you hear the story of Kenneth Young.
They was like, well, Mr. Young, you're not going home no more, you're gonna die in prison. I'm like, who gonna die? I ain't dying in prison. So I was in denial of that because it happened so fast. It's just like, one day I'm 15 years old and I'm in society, then the next, I'm out and you telling me I ain't gonna never go home? That's kind of like hard to deal with.
Young was given consecutive life sentences for a crime he committed at the age of 14. Kenneth Young was just 14 years old when he was coerced into joining an armed robbery gang, founded by his mother's substance dealer, who was at the time 24 years old. He had participated in a series of armed robberies with the gang, and one other that was unsuccessful before they were apprehended by police. The prosecutor charged Kenneth Young and the rest of the gang with armed robbery and attempted armed robbery. Young was given consecutive life sentences without the option of parole, despite his young age and the circumstances surrounding the crime he'd committed. Firstly, there was no murder, and secondly, Young participated in these criminal activities alongside adults who should have known better and shouldn't have forced him to participate. Kenneth had also reportedly dissuaded his mother's substance dealer and fellow gang member from committing the crime of rape while they were on a robbery mission. Just as with Joshua Phillips, fortune smiled on Kenneth Young when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Graham v. Florida that it was unconstitutional to sentence a child to life imprisonment without parole for a crime that did not result in the death of any person. A documentary on children in prison, 15 to Life, featured Kenneth Young and his struggle as an adult who went to jail as a child was discussed. The point of the documentary was to educate the world on how the system convicts children, especially colored children, leaving them to grow old and rot in prison. The documentary stressed that children who committed crimes when they were none the wiser should be given a second chance.
Sometimes mama lock me and my sister in the room and she just be gone.
In most cases where a teenager or a child is involved in a criminal act, there is an adult who is either neglectful, indulgent, or abusive. In the case of Kenneth Young, his mother was neglectful. Kenneth Young's mother, a former substance addict, held herself responsible for how her son turned out and expressed that she prayed for forgiveness and hope that her son can get a second chance. She also said that her son has been very instrumental in her journey towards ending her addiction. When he found out about his sentence, Kenneth says he was in denial because it all happened so fast. Despite being astonished by his lengthy sentence, Young showed remorse for his actions. One may blame Kenneth's mother for her negligence and letting her dealer around her teenage son. But what Nehemiah Griego did to his parents and siblings leaves room for even more questions about his parents' parenting.
Emotions have run high today in the resentencing of Nehemiah Griego, who killed his parents and 3 little siblings when he was just 15. He's now looking at 3 consecutive life sentences.
As a 15-year-old boy, young Griego ended the lives of 5 people. The horrifying part? These people were members of his family. That's right. The teenager murdered his parents and 3 of his siblings, aged 9, 5, and 2. Griego shot his mother first, and when confronted by his little brother, who had been asleep by her side, he shot him too. The young teenager then went to his already distraught sister's bedroom and shot them too. After killing his mother and 3 of his siblings, he waited for his father to return home from work and shot him dead too. Griego then lied to his girlfriend that his parents had been killed in an accident and drove to church, where he told his pastor and a member of the church the same lie. The church member, who was a retired homicide detective, however, suspected that something was wrong and immediately alerted the police. Griego confessed to killing his family, stating that he'd been having suicidal and homicidal thoughts, and then mentioned that his mother had angered him earlier and that he was just frustrated with his mother.
If he is released, I believe he will do harm to himself or others. One predominant reason he had mentioned multiple times to both my sister Vanessa and I was that he had been hearing voices since he was 12 years old, telling him to kill.
She assured the court that his action was not a reaction to mistreatment. His uncle admits that the actions of his nephew have caused his family pain, but he believes that Griego should be given a second chance. At first, a judge sentenced him as a juvenile, and he was taken to a juvenile facility where he stayed until he clocked 21. After he officially became an adult, the Attorney General argued that Griego had not been rehabilitated and as such may still pose a danger to society. The court agreed and sentenced him to life imprisonment with the probability of parole, paying no attention to Griego's attorney, who stated that sentencing Griego to jail for life was a cruel and unusual punishment. The state's attorney reminded the court that the fact that Griego could murder 5 members of his own family reflects just how detached, callous, and brutal he is capable of being. While Griego didn't show much emotion at the start of the retrial, as the judge read out his sentence, he was caught from behind wiping tears from his eyes. Griego will be eligible for parole when he turns 52. If you enjoyed watching these dangerous teens react to their life sentences, you'll definitely want to check out our next video.